All right.
Good afternoon. We are actually at the noon hour. I'd like to welcome you to this NFIB webinar with Senator Mitt Romney. My name is Candace Daly, and I am the Utah State Director for the National Federation of Independent Business in the state of Utah. The call today is being recorded, and we ask that everyone please mute your devices. I'd like to ask a question. If you'd like to ask a question, you need to either email through the link that you received for this meeting, or you can comment on the chat section of our teleconference, and we will try and pull those questions out. I appreciate the fact that many of you have already sent questions to me. I've got them in front of me and highlighted so that I can make sure and get those questions asked. And so at this point, I would actually like to just do a brief introduction, very brief, of Senator Mitt Romney. First of all, I want to let you know I've listened to him on a couple other conference calls in the last 2 weeks. It makes a lot of sense. He understands business. That's what his background is. He earned a JD and MBA from Harvard, and then he made his career in the business world as a CEO, a consultant, and then turning companies around. He explained a good share of some of that on one of the conference calls, and I really appreciated that. That's one reason why I wanted to ask him to come on this call to try and help my small businesses in Utah understand how to navigate this COVID-19. We made it through 2009, 10, 11. This is a whole different scenario, and we're working on uncharted waters here. So since the start of COVID-19, Senator Romney's been in the middle of all the phases and pieces of legislation that have been passed federally and in the future. And I'd like to turn the time over to Senator Romney now to give us some comments. Welcome, Senator Romney.
Well, thank you, Candace. It's good to be with you and good to be with members of your organization and businesses across Utah. As you point out, I was not always a political person. Most of my career was in business and in crisis management. My job was to take the reins of a business in trouble, typically close to bankruptcy, and see if we could turn it around. And because of that background, that's why Governor Leavitt asked me if I'd come out and help organize the Olympic Games, because as you all remember, that was a bit of a turnaround situation. But despite the things I've seen during my career, I've never seen anything like this. I have never seen a shutdown of an economy that is so devastating to businesses of almost every type. And of course, simultaneously across the whole state, the whole nation, and in some respects across the globe. So this is historic. And what you are going through will be written about, and you will write about it as well. And in some respects, because it is historic, there's really no precedent for what we're going through and how to deal with it. I would tell you, and you already know this, that at the state level, there's a real effort to try and help small businesses, and the state of Utah has put together a lending program to help small businesses. And from what I can tell, Utah is doing the best job of any other state I've seen in this regard. The state is also doing relatively well economically. And I know that for many of you, that's like a laugh because you've had to shut down. But overall, the great majority of people in Utah are still able to work. And so there's some hope that when this finally gets settled down, COVID-19 that is, that Utah will have a more rapid return than perhaps it otherwise would. The federal government is also trying to help, and as in all things where the federal government tries to help, it's kind of a disjointed, disorganized effort. The main vehicle to help smaller businesses is the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP. And you know how that works. It's a facility of some $350 billion that Congress appropriated. And what happens is a small business this could be a sole proprietorship, it can be an independent contractor, it can be someone with 5 or 10 employees, anyone up to 500 employees can go to a credit union or a bank that has a relationship with the Small Business Administration. And there are about 800 of those in the country. And many of the larger institutions have those relationships. Some of the smaller are going to be getting them. But you can go to one of those banks or credit unions, and they will loan 2.5 times your average payroll. If you're sole proprietorship, why it's your average revenue, 2.5 times your average payroll. And that's the average in normal times. It's not looking at your average right now, having perhaps laid some people off or having your business decline, but in normal times. And as long as you use these funds for approved purposes, this loan will be forgiven. And the approved purposes are paying payroll, rent, interest on the mortgage, and utilities. So this is, if you will, almost free money. You get the loan, you pay it for your employees, and it gets forgiven. If you've already laid employees off, in order to get the loan and to get it forgiven, you need to rehire them, or at least have the same number of full-time equivalents so that you can show, in fact, you kept people on the payroll. There's a question asked, why is this done through banks and credit unions? And the answer is, well, the government doesn't really have a vehicle to provide money to businesses all across the country. There's no office that hands out checks for businesses. So the government didn't know how to do it. And the best way to get it out there seemed to be to get it through banks and credit unions. And the federal government, through the Federal Reserve, will be buying these loans from the banks and from the credit unions so they can keep offering them. That's what the $350 billion is for. The other reality is that we all figured that the banks and credit unions would know you, and that the government in Washington would not know you. So in Washington, we couldn't tell whether you were real or not real, and they would therefore be able to reduce the fraud that might occur if people just came up and said, hey, I want some money. So that's why it's going through banks and credit unions. One of the challenges I recognize is that we and they have wanted to get money out as fast as possible to try and keep more people in their jobs. And so the banks and credit unions have gone to or have listened most immediately to the small businesses that they know best, where they have lending relationships already in place, and they can work with them very quickly to get money out. And that's where most of the money's gone so far. And of course, sole proprietorships and independent contractors have not been able to apply until today. Today is the first day that independent contractors are able to apply for a Paycheck Protection Program loan. Sole proprietorships were able to apply last Friday, but now both types of small institutions are able to apply. The good news is you could apply. The bad news is we're going to run out of money. The $350 billion is not enough. And the demand for these funds is so extraordinary that we tried this last Thursday to put more money into the effort. The Democrats said, no, we won't let you do that unless you also give more money to states, to towns and cities, to hospitals, and we also want to have special set-asides for minority-owned businesses and for women-owned businesses and so forth. And the feeling of the Republicans was, let's get this money out as fast as we can. Those complications will slow things down. As a result, the job didn't get done. And so we're going to have to keep on working to try and get more money into this account. There's one other federal program that you need to be aware of that's going to really impact your business and give you some thought about how to deal with it. And that is if you have employees and if they go on unemployment, if you put them on furlough or lay them off and they go on unemployment, typically in Utah, they'll get a check of about $350 a week. But at the federal level, we have increased that amount by an additional $600. So they'll be getting $950 a week. In many cases, that's a lot more than they're making when they're working. So you're going to have some people who say, hey, I don't want a job through the Paycheck Protection Program. I'd rather go on unemployment and get that $950. That $950 isn't out yet. Utah is almost ready to start sending those checks, but because it's taken a while to get their computer systems to figure out how to do that. But when people start realizing they can make more money being unemployed than being employed, why, that's going to have an impact on you. So that's the background in the federal help. I just note a couple things and then turn to any questions you might have. First, I very much appreciate what you're doing your best to hold your business together. I know you're doing it for yourself and for your family. but it's also important for our state and, frankly, for our country. The capacity of our country to be able to do what it does for schools and for seniors and for national defense depends on goods and services being produced in the private sector. And so what you're doing is awfully important and extraordinarily valuable to our entire country. I also note that you're making some difficult decisions. You want to help the people that have been associated with your enterprise. At the same time, you got to save your business, and that's really critical for the reason I just described. And when you think it's over, when you think you can't go any further, when you think, gosh, this business has got to close down, I just can't go on any further, I can't pay my utility bill, I can't pay my rent. My experience in turnarounds is actually you can go on longer than you think. When you think that you can't make it beyond next Friday, you'll find you can go further. Sometimes you just have to go to the people you owe money to and say, it's going to take a little longer for me to get this to you. We're going to have to wait till this crisis is over. I'm applying for loans from the Paycheck Protection Program. I'm doing this and that. And you'll find my experience has been when I thought we couldn't possibly go on another week, somehow we went on another week and then another and then another. So it's worth holding your breath and staying in business as long as you possibly can. And just finally, I'd tell you that I think your family's going to look back on these times and say, what did you do during COVID-19? How did you make it? How did you pull it off? And they'll be interested in the stories of how you fought to make sure you could keep your business alive. People in our state have a pioneering spirit, whether we're descendants of pioneers or we've just moved into the state. There's something about our state, which is that we can get the job done and we stick to it longer than others. So I'm proud to be a person who helps represent people across our state. Proud of the work you're doing, and will do my very best to represent you and to be as helpful as I can to encouraging our small businesses to thrive and survive during this difficult time, so they can come hopefully bouncing back when the COVID crisis is over. So with that, Candace, I'll turn back to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Senator. I've got quite a few questions, but I want to start with this one. This question is from Mike Larson. He's with the Larson Family Farms in Central Utah area. He said, why are H-2A and other labor not eligible for farmers, ranchers to claim on these programs? He said these laborers are used because there is not enough workers available in these areas and are essential to producing the nation's food, fiber, etc. Agriculture has been deemed as an essential industry, but is not allowed to participate in many of these programs. Small agricultural producers are facing very challenging times. Prices have fallen significantly, and we need help to stay in business. Why we should not be excluded from using these programs that other industries can participate in.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I agree with you. I will take that back to the committee that I work on, which is the Small Business Committee, and see if we can't make some progress there. The folks that are looking out after agriculture in many cases come from places like Iowa, like Senator Grassley, and they have a very different kind of farming there, and don't recognize the need that we particularly have in harvesting crops and in managing dairies and so forth in Utah and places like Utah. I would encourage you to go to our website. It's romney.senate.gov, and if you go into small business, you can link into agriculture. I believe it'll be on there as farmers.org, but there's a link for agriculture to see what special programs are available in the agriculture community, because your business is clearly eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program, but I do understand that those that are immigrant workers are not counted as part of your average monthly payroll, and that represents a disadvantage. And part of that is just to be honest with you, that sort of the anti-immigrant sentiment which exists in a lot of circles in our country. And I would note that you're not alone in this regard. I do believe it's something that we have to address, and I will take that and do my best to bring that to the attention of my colleagues and see if we can't get things to be improved. But it's, as you know, it takes a long time to get through things through Washington, and getting help in the time you need it is something I'm afraid is going to be hard to do.
I appreciate that. I'm going to ask just one quick question on that. I got a phone call from a member up north, northern Utah, the other day, who's also part of the agriculture community. He's concerned about the delivery services and how things have changed. They have a lot of dairy farmers up in northern Utah that are just dumping milk because the places that they usually deliver the milk to, they don't have any place to sell it because there's a lot of places that used to buy that aren't, and but yet the grocery stores are still empty. Any comments on that?
You know, I have heard that the whole distribution network in our country is having a difficult time, and that's in part because we've changed the places that people are buying things. We used to buy a lot of our agriculture products from restaurants and from food service operators of various kinds, whether it's for schools or businesses and so forth. And schools are closed. I don't have to tell you that. Schools, airlines, all these places that were bulk purchasers are gone or are shut down or nearly so. And of course, there's a huge increase in the grocery store channel, but we don't have a distribution system that's set up to deal with the increase. And I don't have an answer for how that's going to get resolved. There are so many problems like this throughout our agriculture community, and frankly throughout other parts of our community. You've seen with regards to in healthcare, personal protection equipment, masks and gowns and so forth. We just have no effective way of distributing these products to all the hospitals and the caregivers that need them, because we just never encountered a setting quite like this. And so I anticipate that you're going to see distributors figure out their way through this, and if not, if we got a good entrepreneur on the line who can identify the opportunity and make it happen, why, we'd all appreciate it.
That's great. I appreciate that. Thanks. I've got three people that have asked a very similar question, so I'm going to kind of capsulize it into one question. It says, I've heard that the EIDL loans are now going to be capped at only $15,000 because of demand, and the $10,000 grant is going to be reduced to only $1,000 per employee. Is this true?
I had not heard that, but I do understand that the EIDL loans normally have a max of $2 million, but I'm not surprised to hear that they're being capped because of insufficient funds. And we just need to appropriate more funding at the federal level. Interestingly, there's been very little focus on the EIDL loans at the national level, and I will again bring that to the attention of the Republican Senate this week. This is I had hoped this would be a much larger portion of the rescue effort, but virtually all of the funding has gone to the PPP program, the Payroll Protection Program, and that's where the money is now. And the EIDL loans are obviously getting in short supply.
Thank you. I appreciate your attention to that. I have another question that's been asked by three different people. I'm trying to put that together into one question also. One of the gentlemen's from Midway, Utah. The other two, I'm not sure their exact location. It basically says that my bank isn't participating in the PPP program and I can't get a loan from other banks because they're saying I'm not a customer. What do I do, or how can I get help to make sure I can apply for these funds?
Keep going to a bank until you find one that says yes. I got a call this morning from a gentleman in Spanish Fork. Likewise was told, sorry, we can't give you a loan. We don't have a relationship with you. He kept going around and found another bank that said, okay, we'll open up that relationship. There are some banks that are being more aggressive in this regard than others. Even some of the big ones like Zion's are taking on new customers. As you can understand, they're trying to get the money through as fast as they possibly can, and they could do that more quickly if they already know who people are and they already have a relationship with them, and they know it's not a fraudulent setting. So they're kind of reluctant to take on new accounts, but they're still. I mean, I keep getting stories that there are banks that are willing to take on new accounts, and of course the challenge is they're new accounts and small accounts. So the banks don't make as much money on very small business as they do on very big business, and so I can't tell you whether it's going to be a bigger bank like Zions or Wells Fargo or a much smaller community bank. But I'd keep on looking. And by the way, I'd berate my current bank and say, guys, you got to be with us on this, or we're not going to be with you when the times get good. And I do know that there are a number of banks that are not SBA approved banks, but the Treasury Department is working with the SBA to get more and more banks approved. So if a particular bank is not giving out any of the PPP loans right now, they will be able to if they make the effort. So jumping up and down and yelling at them to go to work, and if they're not willing to help you out, having them call another bank that is giving PPP loans and telling them of the relationship that you have with them will give credibility to that other bank that you're a legitimate player and that you're not a fraudulent account, and hopefully speed the application process. So I know it's not working perfectly by any means, but the stories that I'm hearing from our staff in Salt Lake and St. George and Logan are saying, hey, it's working, but it's working in with some difficulty.
Thank you. I have heard, I've not been on there to look myself, but at utah.bank and utahcreditunions.org, they have lists of banks that have been approved to take applications.
Oh, that's good. By the way, we just were in touch with Howard Headley, who is responsible for banking in the state, and he said that he was speaking with a bank in I think it was in Washington County that said they have put out more loans in the last week than they put out in the entire year of 2019. I mean, these banks are overwhelmed. Of course, they require people to do this and prepare documents and get them approved by Washington and so forth. And so, it's gone from, if you will, a car driving 5 miles an hour to driving 500 miles an hour, and they're having a really hard time keeping up.
Definitely, I've listened to that a couple times, and they're struggling. They're struggling actually with communications between the federal and the banks and credit unions to making sure all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted with contracts. So
yeah.
Okay,
exactly.
Here's one other question I want. This one's from what I can see. It says, can I apply for both the EIDL loan and the PPP loan?
The answer is yes. You could apply for both, and I would. There's no harm in applying for both.
Okay.
As you probably know, the EIDL loan is applied for at the SBA directly. You go to their website. The PPP loan you apply through a bank or credit union.
Correct. Thank you. A follow-up on that. I've got a couple members that have called me. They're hesitant to apply for the PPP loan. We're talking Utah. These people have prepared. They've 2009 threw them into a philosophy of that they needed to save. They have a little bit of savings, but they're afraid their savings may only last for a couple months. What do they do if they don't apply for PPP and they get a few months down the road and their savings has run out?
That's the kind of tough question that every entrepreneur is going to have to face. In some cases, some businesses are going to say, you know what, I'm going to let my people go. I'm going to put them on furlough, and they're going to be able to get unemployment, and they're going to get this $950 a week. So my people are not going to be hurting. Given, in many cases, given that amount, and I'm going to just skinny down and run a shoestring operation and work on savings. I probably go to. It depends, of course, on the circumstance. Can you go to your landlord and say, hey, look, I can't pay the rent this month or next month until things open up again? In some cases, I mean, I've had this circumstance. when it got into a business that was we figured 2 weeks away from bankruptcy. And I called the landlord and said, the good news is I sent the check for the rent, but the bad news is I've stopped payment on that check. And I was able to do that because I knew that the property I was in, there's no way he could get anyone else to take it. It wasn't a great piece of property. No one else would want it, not particularly in a time tough times. So I just said, look, we'll work together. We'll do our very best. But you're going to have to bear with me. You can do that with some of your suppliers, and there may be some people who are willing to extend payment terms, and so that's a calculation you have to make. How long can you hold your breath? I don't think there's a disadvantage, if you will, in being able to apply for a PPP loan down the road, except there may not be any money left. That's the challenge. I would also note it's only 2.5 times your average monthly payroll is the amount that you're going to get, and that's not going to last much longer than 2.5 months, if that. So it's better than nothing. But this is a difficult decision. I think each business has to sort of look at their own circumstances and decide what they got to do, what their best chances are to be able to make it through these tough times. If you owe money to the banks, some banks are going to be willing to forbear and to hold off. Others are not so lenient. So it's just a case by case calculation that you'll have to make. And I wish I could give you the best advice, but I think it depends far more about the individual circumstance than it does upon the general rule. I do think, by the way, that the PPP program will eventually get more money. I do think that Republicans and Democrats will be able to compromise at some point down the road here. I can't be 100% sure of that by any means. It's so hard to predict what the Democrats are going to do. But I think we'll probably be able to get there, and this program will not be gone a month or two from now.
I appreciate those comments. Thank you. Hopefully that helps some of those that are hesitant and not quite sure how where to go. A lot of people don't like to be beholding and take out loans, and so they're very nervous. Okay, so here's another one that I've heard this now from 2 different sources, and there's one that's actually going online right now amongst the business community in the state of Utah. It says, I've heard the Fed may start loaning directly to small businesses. Is this true?
No, I don't believe that's true. What I've heard is that the Fed has announced that they will buy loans from banks. And I'm not a banker, but let me tell you how this works. Let's say you got a bank in Hurricane, and the bank, normally loans, let's say a couple of maybe $20 million a year to various businesses, and then it has on its books those loans of $20 million. Well, this year it might have in 1 week it might have already loaned more than $20 million, and they're wondering, oh my goodness, what are we going to do for the rest of the year? We can't keep on loaning money. We don't have the capacity to do that. Well, the Fed has said they will come in and buy those loans from that bank and take those loans off the bank's book of business. So now the loan will be held by the Federal Reserve. They'll still ask the local bank to oversee the loan and make sure that everything is on the up and up. Ultimately, of course, the anticipation is the loan will be forgiven. If the money's used for approved purposes, that loan will be forgiven. But it won't be a loan that the bank has to keep on its books. Instead, the Federal Reserve will have that loan on its books. So that's probably what people are referring to. Which is the Federal Reserve has said to banks, yeah, we'll take those loans off your book. This is one of the reasons, by the way, why banks are not putting these loans out in some cases as quickly as we might have hoped, because the Federal Reserve has not yet started to buy those loans back. And some of the banks are saying, wow, I got all these loans, and I can't afford it to put out more loans. I don't have the capital to put out more loans. And we haven't gotten a promissory note from the Small Business Administration telling us that they're going to buy them. The Fed is saying they're going to, but they haven't started doing it yet. So some of these banks, I understand, are a little cautious. They're saying, gosh, we don't want to be in a position where where we put out way too many loans based upon the capital we have. So again, the government is trying its best to see if it can't make these things go away. But we joke about the deep state. It's not as deep as we'd like it to be. It's overwhelmed right now. The Small Business Administration is completely overwhelmed. I mean, they've gone from putting out $2 billion of loans a month to putting out $350 billion of loans in a month, and they just don't have the people to oversee something like that. So, and the same thing is true with the Federal Reserve. They're trying to buy these loans from banks across the entire country, hundreds and hundreds of banks. At the same time, they're trying to provide loans to very large businesses and trying to work those out. I should tell you, by the way, the forgivable loans are for small business. Bigger businesses that are getting loans directly from the Federal Reserve have to pay them back. They have an interest rate, which is a market interest rate, and they have to be repaid. So when you hear about loans going to big companies, you should know those loans are not forgivable. For a forgivable loan, it has to be a PPP loan, and that's reserved for companies with 500 employees and less.
So, Senator, that brings me to a question that I do have here that I'd like to ask it. This one's from Peter. It says, we understand that all industries have been hit. Some, for example, the massive live events and socially structured businesses like sports clubs, fitness centers, etc. They're 100% closed. All events have been canceled for the near foreseeable future. How do we ensure the rebuild is from the bottom up and resist the headline grabbing and easier route temptation to simply fund large industries like airlines and hotels when funding and support for the underlying businesses will perhaps start a little slower, but once in motion, have a greater exponential growth impact?
Well, that's a good question. And I understand that the president is forming a task force, a restart the economy task force. And the idea probably is not going to be to provide additional funding to jumpstart the economy, but rather to authorize and to encourage the, if you will, the opening of people going back to work. And so we're looking at countries like China, Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea, and to a certain extent Germany, and Sweden in particular. Sweden has not closed down. They're still going full bore. And so the experience there has been to say, not here's a check to get your business started, but instead saying, okay, it's all right to open up restaurants again, or it's all right to open up a particular category of industry and let people go back to work. So I think it's more likely you're going to see the federal government encouraging states on a state-by-state basis to open up various kinds of businesses and to encourage people to patronize those businesses. So now I can also tell you that in order for the economy to get going, the basic backbone of the economy, our transportation infrastructure, our food infrastructure, airlines and so forth have to be operating. And so there will be an effort, I'm sure, for that to happen. But I do know, looking with regards to airlines, they're not sure they want federal dollars. They're looking to see whether they will do better just getting private money to help them stay afloat.
Great, thank you for those comments. I've got one last kind of three-part question here that I'd like to ask you. It says, I'm getting more concerned about what moving beyond the coronavirus shutdown looks like, which you just partially addressed. In Utah, we have the state clamping down on travelers into the state starting Friday. Does that include truck drivers? I think this is a really bad policy either way. Obviously, these are small businesses that rely on trucking. Salt Lake County's mayor wants to lengthen the shutdown. And then he says, is there anyone working on building the way out of the shutdown? And you just addressed that partially. That's good.
Yeah, and I know this, the governor and lieutenant governor are looking to see how you can reopen and get things started again. And of course, the concern is you don't want to reopen in such a way that all of a sudden we have another spike of infections, and then they tell us we got to social distance again, we got to close down again. That a double dip in terms of closing the economy would be really devastating, and there are not many businesses that would be able to survive another round of this. And so in order to really completely reopen the economy, we really need to have a COVID-19 test, presumably an antibody test to be easiest, because that's an instant test. You take a drop of blood and it tells whether you have the antibodies, meaning you've had COVID-19. Then you can go back to work. You're not going to infect anybody, and no one's going to infect you either. We need to have that test basically throughout the entire population. And until we have testing that's throughout the entire population and available not just to those that are sick, but to anybody that wants to get tested, people are going to be really reluctant to go back to a restaurant, to go back to a sporting event, to go back to work, frankly, if they think they're going to get sick. There's also information we're going to get about the age of people and the conditions of people who get really sick with this disease. Some analysis suggests that the people who are really at greatest risk are the elderly and those with a pre-existing condition, and so perhaps younger people can go back to work, and those of us a little older may have to take a little longer time. With regards to people coming into the state, my understanding is that the truck drivers and so forth driving into the state will see an app pop up on their smart device, and it's asking for information, but there will not be roadblocks stopping vehicles from coming into the state. Instead, it's going to be asking for information. Same thing at the airport. People will be given a form asking to fill out the information. They're looking to see, have they come from hot spots? Are they experiencing any of the symptoms of COVID-19? And by virtue of doing that, trying to again limit the spread of this disease. Other countries that have restarted their economy have found that indeed there begin to be again hotspots develop. So South Korea, for instance, dramatically has reduced the number of COVID-19 infections, but every now and then a new area pops up with infections rising again. But because they are able to test so quickly and effectively, they're able to isolate those people that have the disease and get the economy up and going again. So testing is really the key. We will know we're on the verge of reopening our economy when testing is available throughout our state, when people can get a test and be confident that they haven't got the disease and they're not going to be working with someone that has the disease. That's the key. If I had to point to one single thing that's going to be the most critical to getting our economy started again, it is a widespread availability of testing, and I mean throughout the entire population. So hopefully we'll see that happening sooner rather than later.
So, Senator, I'd like to give you the opportunity to kind of wrap up what you may have come to your mind while we've been asking these questions, and also tell us where you think you see things going in the future in Washington, D.C., what you think you could do to drive what needs to help get us out of this COVID-19 crisis.
Well, thank you so much. I'll start with the last part of the question first, which is I am, as you know, one of 100 senators, and Mike Lee and I make 2 out of 100, and we work together to battle for the things that are helpful for our state. I would note there are a number of other states, particularly in the Intermountain West and the Midwest, that have very similar concerns that we have, and we band together to try and push, particularly on matters related to agriculture, but small business. Beyond the agriculture business, small business throughout the country, whether you're in New York City and you've got a shoe repair shop, or whether you're in Alaska and you've got a fishing boat. In all these cases, small businesses are feeling the pain and looking for ways to survive. And so there is a very strong effort to try and provide additional funding to small businesses so they can keep their employees and therefore make it easier to start back up again. And for those employees that are laid off, to have sufficient funds for those people to be able to keep body and soul together. I I wish I could tell you that that Washington works terribly well. It does not. It was not organized to deal with emergent situations like this, and therefore it's hard for us to be able to move very, very quickly. The PPP program is really an exception. Basically, over a week, Republicans and Democrats put together a $2.2 trillion program to try and help hospitals, states, cities, towns, small business, big business, and that's frankly, I don't think that's ever happened other than in wartime. And so hopefully we'll be able to be more productive this next round. We're working now with our Democrat colleagues to see if we can't advance the ball. I can't tell you this on the first topic you raised, which is I'm proud to be from a state where people are working so hard to keep their enterprise together. I know that this has got to be really, really tough. I didn't experience anything quite like this when I was in my business career. I told you that I was involved in turnarounds and bankruptcies, but the pressure you're facing, given all the things going against you right now, is something unlike I think anybody's faced. And so my heart goes out to you. You've got worries about your own health, the health of your parents if they're older, the health of your kids if you got young ones at home. You're trying to take care of the kids and homeschool them because the schools are closed down. I mean, almost everything has been laid upon your shoulders. And there's a scripture that says, the hearts of men shall fail them. That's probably true across the country, but the hearts of men and women in Utah have not failed. We're strong and stout and stalwart, and I have a great deal of confidence that we're going to be able to weather this storm. But it's not going to be easy, and we'll be talking about it and writing about it for generations to come. Thanks so much to all of you for the work you're doing, and I'm anxious for, again, any questions or suggestions you have, pass them along to the NFIB, to Candace, to whomever, and pass them along to us, and I'll do my very best to make sure that we get help as quickly as we can.
Senator, we'd like to thank you for joining us today. We have just over 3,250 members in the state of Utah, and believe it or not, it's growing right now because they're all needing help and trying to figure out how to navigate this. That represents close to about 572,800 odd employees for these small businesses. And these are truly small businesses. The average number of employees they have are 10 people or under. I was speaking to a business owner down in the Price area this morning on the telephone, and they own a shop that rents tuxedos, and they're really nervous because the prom season is where they make their money, and that's done and gone with. So they're relying on some savings, but that's who we represent. NFIB represents the very, very small businesses in the state of Utah, the ones that are trying to just grow their businesses, and a lot of them are from small communities. One of the last things I wanted to leave with my members before we hang up is that you can get a lot of information off of the state webpage, coronavirus.utah.gov/business, and you can get a ton of information off of the NFIB.com webpage. There's also one new round of bridge loans that are going to be opening up on Monday through the Governor's Office of Economic Development. These are solely and only for businesses that are 50 and under. They gave away $6 million. Well, they didn't give away. They loaned $6 million in the first round. They've got about $5 million left to give out in the second round. These are 0% interest loans, no payment due for up to 12 months, but that's another source for my small businesses in the state of Utah. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate the chance to speak with your team, and wish everybody the very, very best.
Thank you. Have a good day.